I absolutely love this episode. Ryan Borland speaks from his heart as he talks about gay men's issues in therapy. He is dropping bombs. He is making it real. He is getting authentic. And I really hope that you'll have a listen here to improve your knowledge. If this is not you, if you are not a gay male, but listen to this to gain a better understanding and increase your empathy and understanding for the population that does deal with these things, as well as share this if you know someone who could really benefit from hearing this message. I really appreciate Ryan for speaking out and being so vulnerable in this episode. Have a listen and let me know in the comments below your takeaways from this.
SAGE is a 501c3 nonprofit organization building community by providing education and counseling about physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. We encourage all of our listeners to find their own path to what holistic wellness means to you.
So I want to start off though with the gay men's issues. Where it kind of starts off, and it always starts off with we're a little boy with a big secret. And that big secret, of course, is that we're gay. But we usually, when we're younger, we don't know that. We just know that there's something different. So some of the things that we really experienced early on, and some of the things I've even experienced early on, was knowing at a young age that we're not like the other boys. So for example, there was this thing called dodgeball back in the day, or Foursquare, if anyone remembers those. And I remember I would always play dodgeball or Foursquare with the girls. Because, well, first off, I could win easier. But second of all, it was because I felt safer and more comfortable. I seemed to identify with that. So, there's always that joke of everyone kind of knows before you do, but when the parents know that there's something different about their kid, that can often lead to inconsistent nurturing. Meaning there might be one parent that's overprotective, or one parent that might be more ambivalent or more standoffish, or maybe doesn't address it at all. And then at school, we're usually bullied by or ostracized from our peers for being different. We might play with Barbies, and we might be told, well, why are you playing for Barbies? Barbies are for girls. I remember when I was a kid, we had to have a secret my 6th birthday, we had to have a secret birthday gift giving of giving me Barbie dolls, but we had to hide it because we didn't want anyone else in the family to know about it. So we're already learning to hide certain things of ourselves. And we might then be shamed for effeminate qualities or mannerisms. And, you need to be more tough. And really at the end of this, we're taught that all parts of us are not always welcome. And one of the most impactful experiences that I had was in 3rd grade. Everyone in the class called me half boy, half girl, because I would hang out with the girls. And I really internalized that growing up, where I actually thought, well, maybe I'm a girl trapped in a boy's body. And that wasn't the case, as I learned later on for myself. But we already grow up with a very extreme amount of trauma. That's not necessarily, the big T trauma where one big event happens. It's all of these small little events that happen over time that in the end teaches us that parts of us should be hated or avoided at all costs, because it's shameful to have those parts. So we learn then to hide in shame. So as we grow up, we're now hiding in this shame, hiding from it, from ourselves. And the first thing is, the hardest person to come out to is yourself. We try to live a straight life in order to maybe please family or ensure we belong. I definitely tried that. Felt like doing laundry. There was nothing there. So we have that initial denial of our sexuality and then this internalized homophobia. And that brings us to be living 2 separate lives. We have our acceptable public self and then our secretive, darker self that we see as darker because we've taught that it was darker. We might have learned from family about what happens to gay men, especially in the generational differences. A gay man in their 50s nowadays has a totally different experience than someone who's growing up now. Back then it was in the middle of the AIDS crisis, where being gay meant you were going to get AIDS and die. At least from, the stereotypes at that. So when we're ever questioned about our sexuality, we might get defensive, and not trying to accept this reality. And when we're going through this during our teen years and our young adult years, where we make all the wonderful mistakes that we learn from, well, we can't really learn how to develop a healthy level of self-esteem with ourselves because we're already in conflict. So it prevents the development of healthy relationships. And our development of our own sexual and individual identity is delayed. Because if you think back to when you were younger, during your teen years, you might say like, oh, I had my first boyfriend and first this. We didn't really experience many of our firsts in high school. We kind of went through a second puberty later on in life. But during this whole time, this shame is really never acknowledged. We just learn to run from it. We learn that we have to be a chameleon and adapt ourselves to our environment. We might experience even trauma of being outed by family or friends before we even come out to ourselves. So when this shame is unacknowledged, we usually will cope through achievements and actions, developing what I kind of call as protector parts that compensate for this shame. We seek that validation from others while also hiding our authentic self and thinking to ourselves, if I do enough, then people will accept me, will accept that flaw in me if I do enough. But in the end, we just seek an inauthentic validation from others. So how do we compensate from this? So some of the common compensating behaviors that we kind of will develop is we search for low-level validation from others. What low level is it's looking at our achievements or what we've accomplished or how our body looks, and nowadays with social media, and our Instagram, and well, if I have enough people that, like my page, then I can feel good about myself, but it's never long lasting. It usually only is temporary. And that leads to like body image issues where we might not feel like we're fit enough. We have conflicting pressures to counteract any feminine stereotypes. So we try to act straight, lower our voice. I don't know how many times on the phone I've been called ma'am, and it just stings a little bit, Substance abuse, or what I put as partying, because, in the gay world, we don't call it substance abuse, we call it partying, Special K and Diet Coke. And alcohol. And it's very much because the gay clubs in that world is really the place where we feel safest, where it's our place where we can be our genuine self. The Grindr cycle. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the app Grindr, but if you haven't, what the Grindr cycle is where often as gay men, we will feel this intense loneliness. And we are seeking this authentic validation for others to just accept us for who we are, to just feel safe at once, like we can bring that little boy inside of us out. So we go on Grindr, we find this instant gratification of a hookup. For that split second, we don't feel alone. But then afterwards, we now feel guilt. We now feel shame. We now feel stuck in that. And so we feel alone again. And so we go back on Grindr to then go back into that cycle. And then relationship hopping, or kind of serial monogamy. We look for a relationship to find that purpose and meaning, like this person's going to save us, this person's going to rescue us, this person is going to be the person that we want. We have this idealized version of what a relationship should be without an accurate model, especially in same-sex relationships, of what it's supposed to look like. So the moment that that person doesn't live up to our idealistic expectations, we're going to go and look for something else, because the last thing we want is also to have a relationship fail and feel responsible for that failure. So we'll kind of jump ship. Or we might dive into financial and career success. We might completely disown our personal relationships and that development, and we might dive into our career and trying to climb the ladder, all while not probably being out. If you've known anyone in the LGBT community, or if you yourself are, you know that when people ask, so are you married? Usually there's this little bit of hesitation of, well, my partner, so there's already the kind of this feeling of shame. Or we might climb into social status. We might try to work our way to the top of something. But then when we get to the top, we're now not satisfied by it. So throughout this whole process, and I use an internal family systems process to really look at and examine this and to help people heal from this, because then they can be their own therapist eventually. And so we develop these protective behaviors, or what I call parts, to avoid feeling that shame ever again, to feel exposed, to feel out of control. And the two types of parts that we develop are our manager parts, which proactively prevent the shame from being triggered. So these are those parts of us that will like make sure that no one judges us on our body. So we'll work out all the time. Or we might be a people pleaser. But when something happens, a firefighter part comes out, and those reactively come out if the shame is triggered and way too overwhelming, doing anything we can not to feel that, to try to drown that feeling down. And it's this endless cycle that happens inside that just we cannot seem to break from. So what happens inside during that cycle? So just to kind of give you an idea of how I conceptualize it, is an invalidation trick. An invalidation triggers our hidden shame. So it comes in, someone might say, you know, gosh, you're a little chubby, and we're already very insecure about our body. Well, we put a wall in between us and that shame. We don't want to experience that shame. We don't want to take ownership of it. So we're going to react or try to be proactive about it. So our manager protector might step in. And that might be inner critic. We might criticize ourselves. We might also have a judgment part. We might judge other people before we get judged. We might people please, or we might use, you know, I think the gay man's always known for their sarcastic humor and wittiness and all of that. But that usually develops as a protective mechanism. We might over-exercise. We might go to the gym after that. But if it becomes too great for that manager to really protect us and to keep that shame from coming up into the surface, then our firefighter steps in. And that's where we're going to have reactive behaviors. And that might be addiction, alcohol. We might turn to drugs to just numb that feeling. We might do a hookup. We might go into that grinder cycle, intense rage, disordered eating. And eventually, if then none of those work, we go to self-harm and oftentimes suicide. Because a suicide is usually, if there's a relationship you have with yourself that's conflicted, suicide is basically breaking up with yourself. It's saying, I can't handle this anymore. The pain's too great. And what often happens with this, when these protector parts of us come up and we don't actually address the shame, they're starting to get in conflict with each other. I don't know if you've ever had that time where you might have this really difficult feeling. And so we want to turn to alcohol. But then we're going to have another part of it that's like, why are you doing that? You're just ruining your life. Why do you keep doing that? You need to stop drinking. But the drinking part's like, but I've got to drink, because if I don't drink, this is all going to come up and I can't handle it. And we go back and forth, back and forth. And often with other therapies, they go, okay, great. Well, let's do some practice skills to reduce that alcohol use. Okay, that's also going to create that similar cycle, because now we're almost in cahoots with our manager parts and going, yeah, that alcohol part is just awful. We got to get rid of it. But often through that whole entire process, not once is the shame acknowledged. And so whenever that shame is triggered, it's often ignored or buried or completely disowned. And that younger shame part of us is really that little boy who had that big secret that thought, no one's going to ever accept me. And we don't actually even accept him. So what I do with my gay male clients, gay men, are a few things, but with the IFS process is to end that cycle of shame, to end that stuckness of doing the same thing over and over again, and acknowledging those deeper parts of us that hold on to that pain. So first, it's helping the client identify what their protective parts are and understanding their role in our internal system. How did they form? What's their job? How do we feel towards those parts? Do we hate them? Do we like them? And creating what's called the self-energy, which self-energy comes from a place of compassion, calmness, centeredness, creativity, courage, healing, harmony, which often is hard to access at first because there's so many parts in the way. So it's not about getting rid of the parts. It's about allowing those parts to not have such extreme roles, because if you're doing that all the time, those parts are tired. They're tired, but they're doing a really important job. So we validate and acknowledge the role they've taken on. show appreciation to those parts of us for what they've done in protecting us for so many years. And then with the parts' permission, as we understand them, we access the deeper wounded parts, holding on to those shame burdens, those thoughts and feelings about ourselves, those beliefs. And these burdens aren't necessarily always just ones that have developed in us. They're ones that we've also inherited from our parents, from our family. Because I like to say, when we come out of the closet, our parents go in the closet, and then they've got to go through their own coming out process, and their own feelings of shame. And so if we take on our parents' shame, well, then, yeah, we're going to carry that burden for them. So it's accessing that, and then being able to witness the wound's pain in a way that's healing, not re-traumatizing, where we look at it from a place of compassion, healing, harmony, centeredness. And then we retrieve and unburden those wounded parts, inviting them to find and create positive attributes within themselves. And living by a way that we are looking within ourselves. So when we get triggered, instead of going to our coping, we actually are able to look for the wound and actually show compassion towards that wound in us, versus trying to run from it. Because once we can accept it within ourselves, it's so much easier to then allow others to accept it and to also share it. And so once those parts are unburdened and retrieved and invited back into our system, we're now reorganizing responses by aligning them with personal values of the man that we want to be. How do we actually want to show up in this world? Getting back a feeling of control. And so that includes living by 3 important pillars, which come from The Velvet Rage, which is by Dr. Alan Downs. And it's passion, love, and integrity. Living in a place of passion of what's important to us, opening ourselves up to love and connection. And also living by a standard of integrity. And that includes owning our own feelings and our own reality. No one can be responsible for how we feel or how we respond when we feel intense emotions. And it's recognizing that if we allow other people to control how we respond in the world, we'll always feel out of control. Making space for genuine positive emotions. And choosing our own contentment over the approval of others. Understanding that choice of we can choose how we want to live, and by assertive communication, it's not so much about what others do to you, but it's when others do certain things, what are you going to do? How are you going to be an advocate for yourself? And also learning to forgive instead of resent. And that includes also forgiving ourselves for for everything that we've kind of had to do to protect ourselves. So in the end, it's really about recognizing all the parts of you, letting all parts of us become welcome, and being able to then show up in the world in a way that represents the person that we want to become. So that's really the gist of how I work and such. So I'm just curious then if there's any questions.
That was amazing. We talked in our one-on-one about how dear this is to my heart, and I'm just so grateful that you're sharing it because it needs to be heard.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I just love how you bring in that internal family systems to this, and you're such a great presenter, Ryan, like just bringing this information and sharing this from such a heartfelt place. I mean, I know, gosh, the amount of work that you've done to be in this place where you're out here educating all of us about this is just incredible. And I just want to say thank you for doing that so that you can shine your light and be so bright out there for all the gay men that need you. And for us as allies, right? Like how do we become more effective in supporting, our friends and family who are gay men? That's my question to you, right? Like, because you're talking about how you can help in this very beautiful setting of therapy, which is wonderful. And I, always want to provide referrals to you when I can, because I think there's just something more beautiful about them being able to work with someone who's experienced that, right? Even me as an ally can't do what you can do.
You know, and as a, you know, and for those that are allies, I think one of the most important things is just staying curious and open, you know, when, because everyone's at a different stage of development, you know, as a gay men's journey. And, you know, when I kind of try to think about what are some of the specific things that someone can do, it's really just being that open and curious. And here are other things that I know most allies don't do. But is also these wonderful fun microaggressions that also happen. So here's some things not to do. So if you ever meet a gay couple for the first time, or let's say you just have a gay couple, my favorite is when they're like, oh, you guys are so cute together. Oh my gosh, you know, like we have our tax guy, like every time we see our tax guy, he's always like, I'm so glad you guys found each other, you know, and then he's like, calls us again. And then he's like, oh, I've got something I wanted to tell you. And I'm thinking, oh, are we getting a bigger refund? And he's like, I'm just so glad you guys found each other. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. So really it's just treating us like the normal human beings that we are. And just providing that love and compassion. And if you ever see someone though that does struggle, is just allowing them just to kind of also grow on their own pace. Because often I think one of the scariest things is when someone kind of goes like, well, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. You're just fine. Why are you ashamed of that? That's okay. And then it's like, okay, I shouldn't have this shame. I can't feel that, you know, and just creating space for all of those, I guess, parts of us that come out, you know? Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for sharing that and just continuing to be that place. I feel like you create such an openness too. Like, ask any question. This is a safe place to do that. Like, any question that you've ever wanted to know. Like, I don't know you too well personally, but I just get that feel from you. Like, really, truly, any question is okay. And I feel comforted in knowing that I have you to be able to connect with around that. So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we do have some more time if anyone has any other questions for Ryan.
Yeah. Because, you know, and even if there's questions that you're like, well, because there's some things that gay men won't talk about necessarily with someone who's straight. So for example, if you know, top, bottom, versatile, because, you know, in the gay world, we talk a lot about sex because it's a very complex, you know, different process. So, you know, if there's ever questions about terminology or terms that you've heard from the community or anything like that too, you're always welcome to ask. Like if someone's like, well, I'm a bear, I'm an otter, you know, I'm versatile, like what does that mean? All of that too, because and if you ever do want to just kind of have a reading, I highly, highly recommend The Velvet Rage. I kind of consider it like the gay Bible of just the whole coming out process too. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Okay.
Christine, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question, and forgive me because I just hopped on, so I
Sure.
missed a lot of your talk. But in general, and if this is too far off topic, let me know. I'm working on bettering my relationship with my nephew, who is 25, and he came out pretty late in life, and it was almost like it was almost by an accident. Nothing's by accident, but you know what I mean? Like it wasn't, he didn't sit down with the family and it came out a different way. But the point is, we connected really well up until I think he came out, and nothing between he and I. It's just I think things he's going through and kind of feeling and getting a better him trying to navigate his world better, I think, because I'm over here wanting to give him a big hug, and so just any general advice from just communicating in general, from a respectful standpoint, and it's different because just talking to friends that happen to be gay, that's easy. We're all friends. It's not even a topic you are or you're not, but this is different, I think, because of him being my nephew. So I'm just trying to connect better. And if I debacled the whole question, you can make a joke.
Oh no, you did just fine. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Because it is an ambiguous terrain when someone comes out, and oftentimes, especially with the parents, where either the adult or the kid will come out, and then they'll notice there's been a shift or a change.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's often easy to think, well, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
Am I not accepting enough? Am I not doing the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it's when they've come out, they're no longer able to kind of use that mask that that was very comforting for them. So they're almost having to show up as their authentic self, which is almost a new muscle. So when it comes to that, just reaching out and not trying to push. I think the important thing is not to try to push or make that agenda of okay, I've got to do something to try to make them feel comfortable. It's giving them the space of, hey, I'm here, the door is open, and letting them take control of feeling safe enough to open up with that, because then they're able to feel in control of that coming out process, which I think is so important. Especially if they didn't come out like to the family, and instead it kind of like started to trickle out through the grapevine. Maybe that's usually, because I remember my mom outed me, my whole entire family, right before Thanksgiving, literally. And then I'm at Thanksgiving, my whole family knows, and I haven't told anyone, but everyone knows, but no one's talking about it. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay. So just reaching out like you would have even before he came out.
Sure. Okay.
And so just give him that space.
Just keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And when he comes out, he'll open up about it, but yeah, it's just treating it the same.
Thank you.
Of course.
Ryan, I had one more question that kind of popped into my mind. Something that's come up with a client of mine. She's lesbian and she has a lot of trauma around her religious upbringing.
Oh,
that's a whole other topic, right? And I know one of my niches that I work with is religious abuse. And so I do have clients that come to me who were raised in these high demand religions where there's just so much added trauma. I mean, there's already trauma, like you've explained, in this experience of just our society. And then you add in that whole cultural component.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, that's another subject. My question is about safety and safety in being out in public and places like that. So my client moved from Orange County to another area, and she was just having a lot of paranoia, understandably, like just not sure about the climate of the environment and whether it was safe to be out, and how you have to find these little pockets of places where you feel like, okay, here it's okay if we hold hands or kiss in public, and here it's like we have to pretend like we're friends, like all of these like intricacies. And as I was like trying to help her with that, obviously I understood my privilege as being a white hetero female, and in my situations where I haven't had to deal with that personally, right, because of where I am and my identity. And so I just was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, of like, kind of reminds me of people who are acculturating to our culture here, and like, parental things of how they need to be doing things, and then they're wanting to step out and do something different, but what does the environment allow? So I just was curious on what you'd say to that.
Yeah. So, and I actually grew up, through Calvary Chapel, evangelical. So you are kind of, because we will develop, from how I conceptualize it with parts, is there's like that hypervigilant part. And the first thing I would look at is, how do they feel towards that part of them? Are they okay with that part of them? Do they kind of understand what that part's doing? And at the same time, there's probably concerned parts of them that are probably exhausted from not being able to be their genuine self wherever they go at the same time. But the key thing I look at is, because I think no matter what, because we live in a world where there's never 100% guarantee that we're going to be in a place that's safe, it's important for us to monitor that. But at the same time, if it's becoming such an extreme, almost like paranoia and hypervigilance, it means that for me, this part's put into an extreme role, because there's usually a deeper, more wounded part that's really afraid of experiencing probably something in the past that was not emotionally safe, physically safe. And it's giving them permission, like if they've moved to a different area where they're not sure of who's there, it's building that relationship with that part so they work in tandem to know, okay, here's where I'm safe, here's where I'm not safe. so they can give themselves the power to know, okay, I'm not going to put myself in those situations if I can't, or if I don't have to. I know it's very hard with family when we go to like Thanksgiving and everything. You kind of have to shut it down. But it's so that she can then know, okay, I'm doing this not because I'm pathetic or because I'm a loser or because I'm scared or anything. I'm doing this because I'm valuable enough to protect.
Mm-hmm.
And then giving themselves permission to do that when things do appear safe. Whether it's holding hands, kissing in public, or just even openly talking about partners,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still have to do that to this day. I mean, I still assess that just unconsciously. I'll be like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
are they okay? Am I looking for keywords,
Mm-hmm.
And things like that. Yeah.
And again, I think that's the majority of folks issue is how do we become better allies to create more safety and comfort for you to be able to express that? What cues can we give? And I think that's just the ongoing work. I mean, we still have a long ways to go in our society around this, creating space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you're asking like, key questions might be is just, so, you ask like, what do you do and everything? So tell me about yourself. Like, are you in a relationship? And instead of assuming the gender of like, so do you have a wife? It's kind of keeping things more gender neutral, because also too, nowadays where there's, genders on a spectrum and such, there's also those that aren't just purely gay, they're bi, they're pan, and often those that are bi and such are kind of hidden and not really acknowledged as much, because there's many that are in same-sex relationships, but it's not a gay relationship because one person's bi. So usually I will identify my couples as mixed gender, because it does incorporate all the genders versus opposite sex and such like that.
Thank you for spending some of your time today with us at Sage Holistic Health and Wellness Center. If you like what we're all about, please consider supporting our nonprofit organization by making a tax-deductible donation. To do this, you can go to our website at www.sagewellnessctr.org and click on Donate in the upper right-hand corner. We look forward to spending some time again with you real soon. Take good care.